on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program after too long of an absence, ladies and gentlemen, Duncan Black, the blogger Atrios, who's also seems to be moonlighting for the corporate media. Welcome to the program, Duncan.
Thanks. It's great to be back. It has been a very long time.
Well, I know that you're now writing on Mondays, is it, or Tuesdays for USA Today, or on occasion?
Yeah, it's every other week, every other Tuesday or so. It appears online, sometimes a little bit in print too. So yes.
Spreading your insidious ideas apparently into the conventional wisdom. Now, Duncan, it was reported yesterday that President Obama has now decided that the raising of the Medicare eligibility age is no way to deal with anything that wants to increase the value, or I should say, cut costs in terms of Medicare, or cut costs for seniors, or cut costs for health insurance. That's the good news. The bad news is that according to the White House, the chain CPI, a different way of calculating cost of living increases for Social Security, is still on the table, which would provide Social Security cuts. You have a different idea. Tell us.
Yes. The Medicare news is indeed good news. I think I wrote a column a little while back calling it the worst idea ever, because increasing the Medicare eligibility age would simply, well, first of all, it would raise the overall cost of providing health care to people. It would just it would save the government a little bit of money and shift the cost onto, seniors, many of whom would have a hard time affording insurance, even with Obamacare in action. But the chain CPI is also a horrible idea. It's basically a cut in Social Security benefits. They pretend it's just like a tweak or a gimmick, or it's a cut that's not really a cut. They pretend it's a more accurate way of measuring cost of living increase, but it isn't, because it's possible that it's a more accurate way of measuring cost of living increases for the population as a whole. But it's not a cost of living index which is calculated based on the expenses that the elderly face. And as we know, the elderly face a different set of expenses than we do. They pay for medical expenses much more than the rest of us do. They need home health care and personal services more than we do. And the cost of those things have been going up a lot more than the standard inflation rate over the past several decades, really. So a true cost of living measurement for the elderly would actually probably increase Social Security benefits more, and that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of your USA Today piece, and specifically you talk about it that we should raise benefits for Social Security. You say for 20% or more, and that's a function of understanding that Social Security was always meant to be part of a three-legged stool, and apparently the one of the other legs has really has shrunk. I don't know what the metaphor is. I mean, how to extend this metaphor, but somebody cut that leg short.
Yeah. I actually wrote a column a few months ago making essentially the same suggestion. And I wrote the column more as a provocation. I was just going against the grain. I meant it. I wasn't being disingenuous, but it was more sort of what kind of crazy idea can I put out there? Oh, let's increase Social Security benefits. No one was talking about that. And then I went to, after writing that column, I went and was on a panel at a conference hosted by the National Academy of Social Insurance. And what amazed me was that everybody basically acknowledged that we were hitting a retirement crisis, that current retirees and near retirees, those who are between the ages of 55 and 65 roughly, don't have nearly enough money in their retirement accounts to supplement their Social Security benefits in a way which was expected. And everyone acknowledged this, but no one was actually proposing anything to address it. It was basically like, yeah, well, it didn't work. Oh, well, let's try something new. But that something new isn't going to help anyone who's 55 or older. Even if that something new helps 20-year-olds or 22-year-olds or 25-year-olds in their future retirement. I'm skeptical that their proposals would, but let's just grant that maybe they would. They weren't proposing anything to help the people who are going to retire into poverty.
Let's go back before we get to those potential fixes, if you will, and talk about their merits or their failings. Just give us a little bit of background. I mean, there was a time not too long ago where people had essentially defined benefit programs. Tell us the difference between a defined benefit and a defined contribution program, and when we started to see this shift, and particularly this. I mean, we refer to this to 401ks as an experiment. When did that start to kick in, and what was the theory behind it?
Well, defined benefit plans were your typical pension that if you had a decent job, and that could be a white-collar job or a blue-collar union job anyway, you had a pension, and that pension was some formula tied to your years of service, your income, and there was a dollar amount attached to that, and you knew that upon hitting age 65, or in some cases upon working for 30 years or 20 years, depending on how generous it was, you could count on a retirement income, which was replaced a certain percentage of your actual working income. Okay, some are more generous than others, but it was there for you. It was predetermined, and it didn't depend on the vagaries of the stock market. In the late 70s, there was a sort of a tax change, which basically allowed companies to shift from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. So instead, companies, for those of us who are fortunate enough to have any retirement benefits at all, companies switched from defining how much money they're going to pay you in retirement to having promising to, say, put 5% or 10% of your income into a retirement account, a 401k, and employees could supplement that. Some employers match what employees give. But essentially, you're depositing your money into an account and hoping that you deposit enough and you have investment returns that are high enough that when you hit retirement age, you will be able to retire comfortably and with some economic security.
Now, this essentially was, basically what it comes down to is it shifted the risk, right? I mean, the risk was that when you had a defined benefit program and you were guaranteed, essentially, a guaranteed benefit of X number of dollars, the company had to figure out, or whoever was providing you for that pension, had to figure out how much money they have to put aside every year to reach that goal. And then they basically shifted the risk, right? They basically said, okay, we're no longer going to do that. We're just going to put in a certain amount. If it ends up being the amount that you need at the end of your life, bingo, you won the modest lottery, let's call it. If it doesn't,
right,
you're SOL. Good luck to you.
It shifted the risk. It also shifted some of the costs in the sense that they basically tend to outsource these plans to other companies, which have administrative fees. The companies themselves, since it isn't really their bottom line, their money anymore, they have less of interest in controlling costs. So it shifts the risk, but it also companies actually the amount that they put into your 401k plans are probably less generous than the amount that they previously put aside for your defined benefit plans.
Because basically they just basically have a very optimistic notion of what the returns are going to be on that.
Right. I mean, we all remember the stock market boom and even during the housing bubble, and people would talk about returns of 7-8%. I mean, I don't know, might be some very lucky people who are getting annual returns of 7-8% on their 401k plans, but I don't think most of us are. So the returns were certainly way too optimistic. But the other thing is that, it depends a lot on individual savings, which isn't necessarily so bad. But in times of economic recession, and we've had a lot of that recently, people can access these accounts. People can take money out, okay? And, maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. People need money to, stay at their house. It's not entirely a bad thing that they tap their retirement savings, maybe. But on the other hand, if they tap their retirement savings, they no longer have retirement savings. So, in the past few years, we've had maybe about 25% of people have tapped their retirement savings, either through loans or through just directly taking it out.
And so, I mean, what was the theory at the time behind this? I mean, was it simply that there was corporations lobbied for a tax benefit in this instance? Was there a genuine, what was it that people were just so caught up in this idea of like the stock market is we want an ownership society? What was the sort of
Well, I think that rhetoric actually came later. I mean, definitely, I think it was something companies wanted to. They would no longer wanted to be in the pension business, essentially, and so they wanted this changed just to basically offload it. And I don't think it wasn't really until the late 80s and then into the 90s where I think the sort of rhetoric of, as people were shifted into these plans didn't happen overnight, where we had this rhetoric of, personal ownership and personal investments. And, essentially, everyone was promised the idea that, as long as you started saving a bit of money when you were young, we'd all be millionaires when we retired. And, that just hasn't come true. Most near retire, the average retirement account for near retirees, and this is household, not individual, average household is about $120,000 right now. And that's just, that's not enough to supplement your retirement savings.
Right. I mean, you have to presume you get to be 65 or 67. You want to retire. If you live for another 10 years, you're going to draw that thing down at, you're going to get 12 grand a year, essentially. And that's not enough to live on. And then we supplement that.
No, it isn't.
Go ahead.
No, it isn't. I mean, we supplement it with Social Security. Social Security benefits, median Social Security benefits for retirees are a lot lower than most people think. The Social Security is not actually that generous. The median benefit level, monthly benefit level, is about $1,230. Okay, so $1,230. You supplement that with a $120,000 retirement account, maybe buys you an annuity of $700 a month on top of that. So you're talking, $2,000, okay, a max. Now, that might work if there are two people having that, so that bumps it up to $4,000. Okay, that gets you to an okay income. But for people who don't have a fully paid for house, for people who have never been married or have lost a spouse, who have a one-income household, this just isn't nearly enough. And again, these are median numbers. Okay, there are people who get lower Social Security benefits. A third of all people have literally no retirement savings at all. Okay, so there's just a lot of people who are destined to be in poverty.
So when we talk about, now I know that you're one of these freedom-hating people who don't like to talk about the bazillions of dollars in unfunded liabilities that we love to hear about. But
right.
When we talk about the real crisis that we're going to be facing with the wave of baby boomers who retire, that crisis is going to be, we're going to have a lot of old people who are going to be living in poverty, who inevitably it's going to raise healthcare costs because they're going to cut back on medicine. It's going to put burdens on their kids in terms of supporting them, even at subsistence levels. I mean, this is the real crisis that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Again, I mean, it's the people in the retirement community. They're not the people who are in the business of thinking about retirement issues. All acknowledge that this is a tremendous crisis, which is just now beginning. Okay, and it's not as if we don't currently have any poor elderly people. Of course we do, but we're having a giant wave of baby boomers who are nearing retirement, for whom this 401k experiment, this idea that we would shift from defined benefits to defined contribution plans, would be work for them. It hasn't worked for them. So they've basically grown up in an era where the retirement plan society gave them, for whatever reason, has failed them, and now they're facing retirement, and they're facing poverty, essentially. And unless we do something for these people, it is, as you say, going to be a tremendous burden on their children. it's going to be, to the extent that we hear about these stories, it's going to be a tremendous burden on all of us that, we're going to hear about what it's like when you're 70 years old and you lose your home, or you're 70 years old and you're kicked out of your apartment because you can't pay your rent.
Now, tonight, for the State of the Union, who knows what we're going to hear, but one of the things that is been problematic with the president in the past is that at various times he has embraced this sort of austerity vision. He seems to have backed off it a little bit over the past couple of years, but now we're still talking about a balanced approach, which of course is nonsensical in many respects, because aside from it being sort of pleasing and make you feel comfortable, it's sort of like hot chocolate when you hear like balanced. That's got to be good. Will you please explain to those a few remaining people who continue to listen to me and think that the number one crisis is the deficit, why the deficit and debt are not our number one crises? In fact, they're probably not even high on the top 5 list. Maybe they don't even they're so down on the list it's not really even a crisis. Will you please explain this dynamic to us, as you, sir, are at least arguably an economist?
Well, the deficit is never a problem in and of itself, first of all. So what happens in Washington is you get sort of lesser lights of the Washington press corps just pointing at a big number. They say, "Ooh, deficit, $1 trillion. That sounds scary. It must be bad." But the deficit is never a problem in and of itself. Now, having high deficits can cause problems. It can, for example, cause the cost of borrowing for the government to go very high, and if that happens, that would be bad. If suddenly, instead of being able to borrow money at essentially zero interest rates, the government had to borrow money at 10% interest rates, that would be a problem. We would have to pay for that. But right now, the government, as I said, can borrow essentially for nothing. So the deficit is not causing any problems currently. But we actually have real problems currently. The real problems we have at the moment are high unemployment rate. People don't have jobs. People have stagnant wages. People can't save enough money in their retirement. So the real problem that needs to be addressed is unemployment. Now, the problem is that a balanced approach to deficit reduction, which sounds nice, as you say, also is contractionary. Okay, so raising taxes, us liberals, tend to not get too upset about tax increases, but right now, raising taxes is going to contract the economy. Cutting spending, I'm sure there's some spending cuts that liberals wouldn't mind, cutting defense budget a little bit, but that also is going to be contractionary. That is, all these plans, whatever balanced approach we come up with, is a balanced approach to contract the economy. And, if we get significant amounts of austerity going through, there's a good chance the economy will go back into a more serious recession.
But what about the fact that we're paying so much interest? What is it, 24 cents per dollar? Or some such figure is going towards paying off the interest on our debt. Isn't that a problem? I mean, it sounds like a problem.
Well, it's there's a cost to that, but right now it's actually a problem simply because we're not being very smart. Some of that interest it should be remembered, it's actually being paid to the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve has engaged in expansionary monetary policy, which is just code for they created money out of thin air and bought a bunch of stuff with it, and some of what they bought was the government bonds. So a lot of that money, that interest actually gets paid to the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve takes it back to the Treasury. So in a sense, some of that interest is just money that we're paying ourselves. And, if I was your benevolent dictator, if I ran the country, I would simply be printing more free money at the moment, not forever and for all time, but I would simply be printing more money, and we wouldn't have a deficit problem because we'd just be printing money out of thin air, which, again, it must be said, the Fed is doing anyway. They're just not doing enough of it. They're not doing it in the most sensible way possible.
And but what about, don't we become Zimbabwe if we do that?
Oh, you can. It's policies which are responsible in one moment in time aren't always responsible. That is, I don't advocate the Fed printing up lots of free money forever and ever and ever, and never having to worry about actually using real resources. You can get inflation and hyperinflation. You can destroy your economy that way, but because something in a different time would be bad doesn't mean it's not good now, and it would be very good right now.
That just blew my mind. Are you saying that that we shouldn't just have rigid principles that have no reflection as to what the current state of the economy is?
No, we should actually think about the situation we're in and respond accordingly. So right now, we are in a recession. We have idle resources. We are not at full employment. There are machines that could be working. There are people who would be willing to work. No one thinks we're at full employment, either of labor or of all the resources in the country. And until we get to the point of full employment, concerns about inflation are largely misplaced.
Whoa. And they're letting you print this in newspapers.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. When they asked me to write for them, my goal was to put out crazy ideas. I mean, the ideas actually aren't, as far as I'm concerned, crazy, but they're crazy within Washington. That is, they're outside the discussion in Washington. Everyone in Washington knows we have to cut Social Security, but out there in the rest of the country, people are retiring into poverty, and I bet a lot of them would like us to increase Social Security.
I mean, I don't know if it was from your piece or something that you tweeted the other day or something, but it would be fascinating, or maybe it was on atrios.blogspot.com or Atrios. Is that this?
Eschatonblog.com.
Eschatonblog.com. I still go to the Blogspot URL, but
yeah, that works.
It would be interesting to see a politician who actually ran on the idea of increasing Social Security. I mean, there is no, I refer to this all the time, but I was down at the Glenn Beck 828 rally a couple of years ago, and the insanity pouring out of people's mouths was stunning. But what was more stunning was that to a person, and I may have interviewed 50 different people who were telling me about the fact that we should all be in bunkers with our guns because this country went full-on socialist in the 1930s, to their Islamist training grounds up in upstate New York, to we shouldn't have any bills that are over 50 pages long, to just about every crazy idea you could congregate in one geographic location were expressed to me. But to a person, not one of them would recommend cutting Social Security. And I asked each one of them, what about cutting Social Security and Medicare? Well, that's different because it exists. And we shouldn't do that. It was their way of saying, like, well, I get that, actually. I received that. I want that cut. But that seems to me like I don't know if there's actually possibly a more, what would be a more popular policy plank than raising Social Security payments.
Well, we don't actually know because there isn't a lot of polling on it. There's been a little bit that suggests that what you're saying is absolutely correct. But we don't know because no politician is doing it, right? So, and it's quite amazing, especially, as we have an aging population, maybe 20-year-olds won't get too excited about raising Social Security. I don't know, maybe they will. But, as we have an aging population, we have an increase in the number of Social Security beneficiaries. I mean, I'm sure the Washington press would call it cheap pandering, but or you can think of actually giving voters what they want. It's just amazing that you're not seeing candidates for the House of Representatives standing up behind the podium and saying, "And if I'm elected, I promise to fight to increase your Social Security benefits by 20%." You'd think that would be popular in Florida, say. My state of Pennsylvania has a pretty elderly population in some parts. This would just be an incredibly popular thing, one would imagine, at least in certain areas.
I mean, what is it? What is it that is it because there's this sort of? I want to get your take on it, but it seems to me there's multiple reasons for this. I mean, aside from just, it is obviously the conventional wisdom with the establishment that we shouldn't do this. But I mean, is it a function of, one, there are constituencies that basically just want that money? I mean, just don't want, the value of no Social Security or lowered Social Security payments, I guess has it would make people work harder and longer and be more productive, and it would depress wages, I would imagine, in some respects too, because you've got more people who are desperate to have cash. It would add money to the stock market, and then there's also this sort of feeling of like it's sort of like morally reprehensible that we would have people, elderly people not scrambling around to figure out how they're going to pay for their heating, or they're going to be living high on the hog. Everybody's going to be going to Florida, for God's sakes. I mean, what is this?
I really don't know. I've been watching it for decades. I mean, it emerges in various forms under various names. It used to be called the Pain Caucus and the various front groups, the Fix the Debt crowd, and all these things, whose goal essentially is to cut Social Security. I mean, this really is their goal, and to cut taxes for rich people, but also to cut Social Security. And it really is this idea that pain is good. I mean, pain for other people anyway. Most of these people are rich themselves, but it's just this idea that, for most people, life should be an eternal struggle, and anything we do to make life easier for people is just wrong.
It's weird. And, we obviously, during the halcyon days of the Bush administration, I'm talking actually about the second Bush administration, despite the fact, I think the use of, halcyon during the Bush 41's tenure. The idea of the establishment was the idea of the distinction between sort of like the establishment and the Republicans was not as clear. I mean, because we now know that the Pain Caucus, the Fix the Debt people, I mean, includes people we would have considered to have been allied against George Bush at that time. But in terms of that central motivating factor, this idea. Now, that said, Erskine Bowles, this supposed Democrat under Bill Clinton, was one of the guys to really push for privatization during the Clinton years. But it really has been brought into relief during the Obama administration because it's sort of forced those that we may have perceived, and maybe you were more perceptive than I was at that time, it has created new sort of battle lines, if you will. Give me your thoughts.
It's really frustrating because, I mean, obviously it's frustrating that, think people you thought were, more on your side and more liberal and more correct. It turns out they're not. But to me, the real frustrating thing about the imagined grand bargain whereby the Democrats trade entitlement cuts for more tax revenue. I mean, this is the basic grand bargain, is that what it misses is that Republicans don't care about entitlement cuts. They don't. Now, Republicans, so they're not really willing to trade, and hopefully they stick with that because that would be good news in the end. But the trade here is not one that Republicans are willing to make because Obama is offering them something they don't care about. Okay, now, do I think Republicans would destroy Social Security in a minute if they could? Sure. I mean, they don't like it. They're no fans of the Social Security program. They're no fans of Medicare. They would destroy all these programs. But it's not really what motivates them. They don't get up every day thinking, I want to kill Social Security. They get up every day thinking, I want to cut taxes for rich people. I mean, that's what animates them, okay? And so when you say, well, if we will basically trade you something you don't care about, if you give us the thing you care about most, essentially raising taxes, they don't want to do it. Okay, and I hope that continues. That's good news for those of us who don't want to actually cut Social Security. But it's a bargain that Republicans really aren't fans of, and because it isn't really what they want.
I mean, that's really interesting, and I've heard you say that before. And so when we see the Democrats say we're going to put change CPI on the table, but we want more revenue, they're basically that there's a little bit of kabuki there, right? Because they're basically saying we know you won't take the cuts to Social Security if you have to swallow it with increased revenue, i.e., taxes on the rich.
I don't know if it's kabuki or if they really don't understand what motivates Republicans. Okay, now this could all be just an elaborate dance that they've been doing for years, and or it could represent genuinely what they think should happen. And I actually don't know the answer to that. That's maybe unknowable unless someone in the White House wants to let me know. But to me, it seems like they just don't get it. Okay, and again, that ultimately will be good news if they don't get it, or it would be good news if it's all just a dance. But I actually don't know.
What makes you say that about the Republicans? I mean, it makes sense to me on some level that to the extent that they would want cuts in social insurance programs and Medicare and Social Security, they want those cuts, but only if the Democrats own them. So they can then run against them. But in and of themselves, they're not terribly interested. But isn't that basically where the money is? I mean, or is it that they're willing to, if they can cut revenue from taxes for rich people, the other stuff can die on the vine that the government does. It just doesn't make a difference. I mean, what?
Yeah, I mean, basically, they just want to cut taxes, right? I mean, yes, they talk about spending, but when presented with things to cut, except for mostly trivial parts of the budget, they're not actually that interested. Okay, because they don't. I mean, they're not actually. Most of them are not interested in responsible governance. So all the rhetoric about responsible governance that they issue, all their talk about how we need to be responsible is just a bull. What they want is to lower taxes on rich people. That's really what they care about. And so to the extent that cutting spending here or there aids that goal, they're all for it. But if the offer on the table is we will trade something to increase taxes, they're not interested. So they just want to cut taxes.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see tonight. I mean, State of the Union addresses are considered supposedly not terribly relevant, although it is certainly, I mean, it functions as a bellwether, right? I mean, President Obama last year touted the Financial Fraud Committee Part 2 or whatever it was. Nothing much came of that, but at the very least, it signals some awareness in the White House that that's important to people. I mean, we don't necessarily, we just get a sense of what they think is politically relevant at the time. I mean, is that your sense? Just to do the
I mean, it's one doesn't expect that they'll follow through or be able to follow through on anything that is said tonight. But yes, it is. There's some sense that, as you say, it's at least a signal about what maybe they think people think is important, and so we can take something from that. I guess if he gets on TV each night and says the most important thing we need to do is cut Social Security, well then we'll know what he wrongly thinks is important. But that's what he wrongly thinks is important. So yeah, well, we'll see. I'm not optimistic that we're going to learn an immense amount. I mean, I was struck by the fact that, there are these stories about how Obama was going to be pivoting to the middle class and the economy. And we had the same stories last year about the State of the Union.
Right.
So I'm not sure how many times we can pivot to the economy.
And then, of course, the great new feature with the State of the Union address is that you get two versions of a Republican rebuttal. We'll have the Republican rebuttal, and then we'll have the Tea Party rebuttal. And then I think WorldNet Daily gets their own rebuttal too, don't they? Or I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, I don't know what I mean, I'm not sure yet how many rebuttals the networks are actually going to broadcast. It'll be quite interesting to see if they really do say, okay, if they all of them, not just Fox, but the rest of them say, okay, here's the Republican rebuttal and the fake political party that doesn't exist rebuttal, the Tea Party rebuttal. It'll be quite fascinating if they do that. The Tea Party rebuttal being given by a Republican, of course, because there is no actual Tea Party.
The only argument I could see at this point for a Republican president would be just to see if the networks were to do the same for the left. I mean, we'll have the Democratic response, and then we'll get Atrios will give us a response for the, I don't know, whatever.
Well, maybe maybe if we, get a bunch of billionaires to create a fake story about a fake political party and advertise on their networks, then maybe they'll do that. But I'm not optimistic.
All right. Well, Michael, will you make a note to work on Soros on that accord? All right. Duncan Black from the blog Atrios at eschatonblog.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure.
Sure.
Hope to talk to you again soon.